In this lesson, we're going to begin the process of creating our character using blueprints. All right, so welcome to Volume 3. In this volume, we're going to be talking about how to add interactivity to your games. The first thing that we'll need to do whenever we're trying to create interactivity to our games is we need to have some sort of player game object that will allow the player to move around in our world. Now, up to this point, we've just been hitting play by coming up here to the top and hitting play, and we can move around and we can use the W, A, S, and D keys, but it allows us to just kind of do this fly-through type of thing, and I don't really like that. I want to be able to place my player in here and allow them to kind of search around through the level. So let's go ahead and hit Escape or Shift F1 to exit out of that, and then you'll need to go up to this and hit Stop. Let me just show you what that looks like really quickly, just in case you're stuck there, because sometimes Escape doesn't work. So hold Shift, hit F1, go up and hit Stop. There we go. All right, so to get started with this, first thing we need to do is we need to create a blueprint. Now, blueprints are assets that use visual scripting, and so we're using the blueprint editor to create the behaviors of our game objects. So the first thing we need to do is go ahead and create a folder. Let's go ahead and select our game folder. We're going to go up to New and Folder. Let's call this DT_blueprints and hit Enter. Then left-click on that blueprints folder, and then we're going to go up to New, and we'll create a new blueprint. Now it's going to bring up a dialog box asking us to pick a parent class, and depending on what kind of blueprint or object you're going to be working with, you need to pick the correct class for that. So if you're creating an object that the player is just simply going to interact with, you might use the actor class. But in our case, we want to create a character. We're going to go ahead and use the character here. Now this is going to be a character that will actually walk around. If you're using something that the player can possess, like maybe a vehicle or something like that, you may want to go ahead and choose like a pawn. But in our case, we're going to use character. Now we need to give this a name, so we're going to call this BP for blueprint _ my character. Hit Enter on that. And then now all you have to do is double click on that, and that will bring up the blueprint editor. Now looking at our blueprint editor, there are three modes that we need to worry about. You can access these right here in the top right corner. You can go to Defaults. This will give you all the default properties of the blueprint itself. We're not going to worry about anything in here right now. This will give us information about our character, so we could do things like adding a skeletal mesh to where we could actually see the 3D object. We can add in our animations for this. We can come in and we could maybe add clothing to it. So if it's using clothing simulations, we can come in and do that as well. And then you might want to set up your mesh collisions and things like that. But right now we're just going to be using the generic capsule collision for this. So we're going to leave everything set to default on our defaults properties. So let's go ahead and go to Components. Now components is what makes up our character. So the first thing that we need to do is we need to add a component to this. We want to add a camera to this so that way we can control the look rotation of the character. So let's add a component to this. So we'll just simply come up here to say Add Component, and then you should see Camera. Now whenever that comes in, you'll want to go ahead and move this around. But let's first give it a name. Let's call this First Person Camera. So FP Camera. We'll go ahead and we'll position this. Okay, so we'll put this up. We'll just move it around. And then you can reposition this however you see fit, but I think right here will be just fine. So you want to be able to put that in the viewport. Now, if you have a static mesh, let's say you've got some first-person arms that you're going to be using for your character, you'll want to reposition this camera to fit the final look that you want for that. So just to kind of give you an idea of what that looks like. So that's how we can add a component to this blueprint object. Now, beyond that, let's go ahead and go to Graph. Now, it's important for me to note this really quickly. What we're working with, what kind of blueprint we're working with here, is called a class blueprint. This is new to Unreal Engine 4, and it's very, very handy. I love it. If you're used to using Unreal Engine 3, you're probably used to level blueprints. Now, obviously, Unreal Engine 3 didn't have the blueprints editor, but it did have Kismet, and Kismet will seem very familiar like this. However, Kismet was just strictly level-based. Okay, Okay, now we still have level blueprints in this, but I just wanted to point out that this is called a class blueprint. Okay. All right, so let's go ahead and go over to our graph. Now in the graph, this is where we can place our nodes like events or functions, and we can place these in our graph here, and we can string them together or wire them together to create certain behaviors on our object. So the first thing that we want to do is we want to talk about how to add an event to this. This can be done by simply going over to your favorites, and you can choose an event, which is denoted by this icon here, or you can choose a function, which is denoted by this icon. Now there are going to be two different colors for functions. You'll have a green and you'll have a blue. Okay, I just don't want you to get confused by that. You can see that all here. Now they all have a very specific color coding and they'll do different things, but we're going to just kind of hold back on that. We don't want to get too deep into the reasoning for all of that. We actually have a course, Introduction to Blueprints, if you want to check that out and find out more about using the Blueprints editor. Okay. So let's go ahead and bring in an event. If we left click from our favorites and we drag that in here, you'll see that event node has been popped in. Now we could come in and we could say, let's use a function on this. So we'll simply left click and drag this in. We can wire things together. Now for this one, you'll notice that we have this execution output. It needs to go into an execution input, but you'll notice that this function doesn't have that. And so this will actually get information. So we want to use one of these blues. Let's go ahead and say, let's get all actors of class. So here you can see that we have these execution outputs and inputs, and those can actually go together. All right? Now, let's go ahead and select these. You can do that by left-clicking on them, and you'll just simply delete that out. Okay. Now, once those are deleted out of the graph, okay, you got an idea of how we can bring some of those nodes in. Let's talk about a different way of finding nodes. You can do this using the Find Nodes section of your palette. You can do a search, or you can expand the library and start going through all of these different categories. But that can be a little daunting because there are tons and tons of nodes. Another way of adding nodes in is by right-clicking in your graph, and you can find them this way. Right-clicking in the graph is very handy because it allows us to use this context-sensitive feature that will only show us nodes that will pertain to the current situation, so what we have selected in our graph. So I can actually come in and type in something like input, and this will allow me to get input from maybe a touch device or something like that. And then I can just simply left-click and drag this, or actually just left-click on it. It'll drop it right into the scene or into the graph here. Let's go ahead and select that and delete it. Now you might be wondering, all right, so how do we get started with creating input for our player? Well, we need to take a step back for just a moment. We've created our blueprint, and that's perfectly fine, but we need to go ahead and set up our input axes, and that's done through the project settings. And we'll go ahead and we'll get started with that in our next lesson.